Good afternoon. I am calling to order our regularly scheduled meeting of the Intergovernmental Relations Committee. My name is Elizabeth Glidden. I'm the chair of this committee, and I'm joined today by council members Quincy, Fry, and Andrew Johnson, and we are a quorum of the committee. We have two items of business today, and the first is a proposed charter amendment for sale of wine and beer in certain establishments. And we did have this on the agenda at our last meeting and had requested some assistance from the clerk and city attorney on what might be a slightly revised proposal. I think one is before us. I'm going to ask Mr. Carl if he might want to give us some comments and what might be this suggested ballot language.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Casey Carl. I have the privilege of serving as city clerk. As mentioned before you is a question related to ballot language for a question the Charter Commission has decided to refer to the voters of Minneapolis related to liquor licensing requirements for certain establishments. The regulation addresses the food to alcohol formula that regulates restaurants that are located outside of the downtown area in surrounding commercial zones. Commonly, this is referred to as the 70-30 rule, and that rule was adopted by public referendum in 1996. It essentially requires that those restaurants licensed to sell wine or beer outside of the downtown zone must ensure that 70% of their gross receipts come from the sale of food, with only 30% of gross receipts allowed from the sale of wine or beer. The question was presented to the Charter Commission. They did conduct a public hearing on this proposal and voted at their regular meeting on June 4th to refer this matter to the electorate, and accordingly that matter was referred to this committee by the council to develop the recommended ballot language. You'll recall that came back in the last cycle before this committee. The committee had some questions or concerns about the language of that question. Again, to reiterate, the specific question before this committee has to do with the ballot language. The city attorney's office, as I mentioned, had previously submitted some proposed language. In response to suggestions from this committee, it was held over one cycle to think about alternative language, which the city attorney has submitted, and it should be in front of the committee. I had a chance to speak with Mr. Bert Osborne, who is the attorney for the Charter Commission. He believes that the version now before the committee today reflects not only the rewrite this committee had suggested, but a stronger reflection of the original intent of the issue referred by the Charter Commission. Madam Chair, last time you'd asked me to read the question, and so with your permission, what is before the committee is a request that the title on the ballot be worded, "Remove Mandatory Food Requirements for Wine Licenses." The question, shall the Minneapolis City Charter be amended to remove the requirement that businesses holding on-sale wine licenses in the city must serve food with every order of wine or beer, and to remove mandatory food to wine and beer sales ratios? Under state law related to alcohol sales, that ballot question would require at least 55% of the affirmative votes by those voting on the question for passage. That's a higher threshold than what's typically required, which reflects a long-standing state policy position that issues involving alcohol should require and be passed on a higher threshold. According to this year's elections calendar, all ballot questions must be submitted to the county by no later than August 22nd. We are well within that time frame. I'm happy to stand for any questions the committee has.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. I'm not seeing questions. I'm going to go ahead and move approval of this proposed ballot language and see if there is discussion on the language. I am going to make a comment before taking some other questions from committee members. I personally, I think that this language is much easier and simpler to read. I think also that there was an opportunity for our city attorney to have some discussion with business licensing staff to just understand the complexities of what would be the change and make sure that that was reflected in the question itself. And there's a little back and forth about kind of what do we call these licenses. They are on sale wine licenses, and just to better reflect that so that there is not confusion in the community when reading the question about what is the issue at hand. So anyway, I just want to say thank you to the city attorney for considering and working on some alternative language. I personally think that it makes it easier to understand, and in the end, that's what we want to make sure. There is a question that does not take a position, but presents the information in a way that is easy to understand what would be the change at hand. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I just wanted to share your sentiment as well. I really appreciate this revised language. I think it is much easier for folks to read, and we'll get a better response than from voters. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Frye.
Same idea, reiterating the same point. I think this is a really good result. Just like to thank Councilmember Glidden for putting this together, along with our attorneys and clerk's office, as well as Councilmember Palmisano and Johnson for proposing an amendment the last time around. So thank you.
All right. Well, we do have a motion before us. I'm not seeing further discussion. So all in favor, the motion is to approve the ballot language as proposed. All in favor, please say aye. 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 Opposed, and that item is approved. Moving on to the full council. In time, Mr. Carl. Yeah. All right. Next, we have one remaining item on our agenda for today, and these are proposed revisions to our federal agenda. Mr. Ranieri.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. And periodically we adopt a federal agenda. We really don't do it systematically. Maybe we should start doing that, but it's been hard to do that when Congress hasn't been doing very much systematically. So what we did here is we went through the policies, really removed many of the documentation dealing with appropriations because Congress hasn't been doing much. So we substituted that section for four major policies. One is a policy on appropriations, asking Congress to go back to the appropriations process and do oversight and fund appropriations for programs so they can do what they were supposed to do. Because for the last couple of years, we've just seen basically continuing resolutions and reductions. We also added a couple other policies suggested for your adoption. One is on transportation. As you know, MAP 21, Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century, expires at the end of this year. It'll probably be extended. And we're suggesting a 6-year extension, funding sources that are transportation related and maybe not as heavily dependent upon fuel. They could be charges for freight, charges for mileage driven, things of that nature. We also are recommending a continuation funding for the Highway Trust Fund, because that's quite important. It did happen at the end of this session just last week. And they're the three major issues that we have suggested as being new. Everything else is the same in terms of policy, in terms of substance. There are a couple amendments. One is in the area of invasive carp. Part of it was accomplished, but the part dealing with federal funding to help us redevelop the river and clean up the area up in the Upper Harbor, we had that as one of our policies. That was not accomplished, but the policy to close the locks was. So we left that policy about funding in there. And then under minimum wage, we inserted no less than $10.10 an hour, because that's where the president is under his executive order and where legislation in Congress is. We also added a section of things that were accomplished. Our Congress, particularly our delegation from Minnesota and also from Minneapolis, Representative Ellison, were able to pass several pieces of legislation. The invasive carp was a team effort, almost the entire delegation. And then we had a policy dealing with remittances, payments, getting funds to folks in Somalia. If you remember, 2 years ago, members of the community came and testified before the committee, and we passed a resolution. That's been accomplished also. And there are several other policies also accomplished. So, Madam Chair, that's where we are. There are some policies that are been folded into immigration, and others we dropped and would suggest to put into the state legislative policies. So that's it.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Ranieri. I'm going to go ahead and move approval of the proposed revised federal agenda. Thank you for noting for us. We kind of deal with our federal agenda a little bit differently from the state agenda, and I think we used to have more regularity when our agenda was a bit more driven by earmarks. And so since we have entered an era where earmarks are no longer part of the federal agenda, we have been amending the agenda often as issues arise. and a lot of our attention as well is focused a bit more on working with the administrative agencies as another way to advocate for the city's interests, as opposed to hoping for legislation from Congress, which clearly has been slow to come on most everything. So, Councilmember Frye, did you have something else, or was that from another time? Okay. All right. Any other discussion then on the federal agenda? I'm not seeing any, so we have a motion before us. On approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that item is approved. So thank you very much, Mr. Ranieri. With that, I believe we have concluded with our business for today, and we are adjourned. Thank you very much.